You've pulled up next to one at a red light, a semi, fully loaded, and when the light turns green, you hear it climb. One gear, then another, then a third and a fourth, the engine note rising and resetting until it has shifted more times clearing the intersection than your car does on an entire on-ramp. Your car gets by on 6 gears. A big rig can carry 10, 13, sometimes 18. And here's the strange part. For about 80 years, that number kept going up. So why does one vehicle need 3 times the gears of another? The easy answer, the one almost everyone reaches for, is that trucks are heavy. They haul 80,000 pounds, so of course they need more. That sounds right. It's even partly true. But it isn't the reason. And the moment you dig past it, weight turns out to be a decoy. The real culprit isn't the load behind the engine. It's the engine itself. And the same stubborn quirk that forced trucks to stack on gear after gear is bolted into almost everything you bought this week. You've just never had a reason to notice. But let's start with what everyone gets wrong. Picture it from the driver's seat. You are stopped at the bottom of an on-ramp with 80,000 pounds behind you. That is the federal weight limit for a loaded tractor trailer, set in 1982, roughly 20 times what your car weighs. Now make all of that move from a dead stop, with an engine that on its own can barely budget. This is where the low gears come in. A transmission's first job is torque multiplication. A deep low gear takes the modest twist of the engine and multiplies it, trading speed for raw pulling power. The way the low gear on a bike lets you crawl up a hill you could never stand while pedaling. Without it, a loaded rig would not inch forward. It would just sit there, straining, going nowhere. And it works in reverse. Point those 80,000 pounds down a long grade, and your brakes become the enemy. If you ride them the whole way down, they overheat, fade, and sometimes quit entirely. So drivers downshift instead, letting the engine hold the truck back. Those runaway truck ramps carved into steep highways exist precisely because this sometimes fails. So far, the weight answer holds. Heavy load, low gears to start, low gears to stop. Case closed. Except it isn't. Weight explains why a truck needs low gears. It does not explain why it needs 18 of them. A bulldozer is heavier and gets by with a handful. A tank weighs more still. If brute weight were the whole story, a truck would need 2 or 3 big ratios, not a finely spaced ladder of them. Something else is forcing all those tightly packed steps, and it has nothing to do with what's in the trailer. But that's only part of the story. The thing forcing all those gears isn't the trailer. It's a personality flaw the diesel engine has never shaken. Your car's gasoline engine is forgiving. It pulls from around 1,000 revolutions per minute all the way to 6,000 or 7,000 revolutions per minute before the red line, a range several thousand revolutions per minute wide. You can leave it in one gear across a huge spread of speeds, and it adapts. A big diesel cannot. A heavy truck diesel makes its useful power in a band only a few hundred revolutions per minute wide, usually between roughly 1,000 and 1,800 revolutions per minute. Drop below it, and the engine lugs and stalls. Climb above it, and you're just burning fuel for no extra work. The sweet spot is brutally narrow, and the engine refuses to leave it. Here's the analogy that makes it click. Imagine a singer with a 1-octave range performing a song that spans 3. The only way to hit every note is to change key constantly, far more often than a wide-range singer ever would. The diesel is that 1-octave singer. Each gear is a key change. To keep it singing in tune, from a crawl to highway speed, you need a lot of keys. That's why the gears sit so tightly together. Each one drops the engine right back into its sweet spot before it can wander out. But you can't bolt 18 separate gear sets into a box. It would be enormous. So engineers cheated. They took a compact 5-speed main box, added a range selector that splits it into a low half and a high half, then added a splitter that cuts each high gear in 2 again. 5, doubled, split, and suddenly you have 13 or 18 usable ratios from a box barely larger than the original. And this exact math, the hunt to keep an engine inside its window, is why the food in your kitchen is priced the way it is. Hold that thought. So more gears keeps a stubborn engine happy, which raises a question. If 18 is so good, why are the newest trucks on the road quietly going back down to 12? But here's where it gets strange. To understand why the number climbed for 80 years, go back to when it barely existed. The earliest trucks had 2 or 3 gears. Engines were small, loads light, roads short. But as engines grew and freight got heavier, 2 or 3 ratios stopped being enough to keep them in their bands. By the 1940s, most trucks ran 3 to 5 speeds, and driving one was a real skill. These gearboxes had no synchronizers, the parts in your car that quietly match gear speeds, so your shifts feel smooth. None. So the driver matched the speeds himself by ear with a technique called double clutching. Push the clutch, pull to neutral, release. Blip the throttle to spin the engine to exactly the right speed. Push the clutch again, and only then slide into gear. Miss that speed by a few hundred revolutions per minute, and the gears refuse to mesh, grinding metal on metal with a shriek every trucker dreaded. People called them crash boxes. Every shift was a small test you could fail. Then came the leap. In 1963, Eaton introduced the Fuller Roadranger with an air-operated range shift and a twin countershaft design that massively increased how much torque a compact gearbox could survive. That made stacking on more gears practical. The range and splitter trick took off, and through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the count marched upward. 5 to 8 to 10 to 13, and finally to the legendary 18 speed. For 60 years, the industry was locked in a slow arms race against one opponent that never changed its mind: the engine's narrow power band. Every new gear was another weapon, another way to pin the engine inside its sweet spot for one more sliver of road speed. And then, almost overnight, the arms race reversed. The opponent didn't get less stubborn. Something else changed, something that made all those hard-won gears start to look like too many. Therefore, what you're about to hear should change how you see every truck on the road. The thing that changed wasn't mechanical. It was the driver, or rather, the replacement of the driver's left hand with a computer. For all those decades, the real limit on keeping an engine in its band was never the gears. It was the human working them. Even a great driver shifts a half beat late, grabs a slightly wrong gear, hesitates. Then came the automated manual transmission. Detroit's DT12, introduced around 2012, is a 12-speed that still has real gears and a real clutch, but a computer fires every shift through electric and air actuators faster and more precisely than any human could. It always picks the right gear and never mismatches, and that precision unlocked the thing the old 18 speeds had chased all along but could never reach. It's called down speeding. You gear the truck so tall that at cruise the engine spins as slowly as possible while still doing the job, because a slower engine burns less fuel. The industry rule of thumb is blunt. Every 100 revolutions per minute you shave off cruise speed buys you roughly 1% better fuel economy. Engines that used to cruise near 1,500 revolutions per minute now loaf closer to 1,100. One analysis found that dropping from around 1,450 to 1,125 sends nearly 30% more torque through the driveline, enough that the whole drivetrain had to be rebuilt to take it. So the 18 speed wasn't beaten by a transmission with more gears. It was beaten by a smarter one with fewer. The gears were never the goal. They were always a tool for one job, keeping the engine in its window, and software finally aimed that tool better than a person could. And now watch where this lands in your life. Trucks move around 70% of the freight in this country by weight, and fuel is the biggest cost of running one. So that math isn't trivia. It's pressed into the price of the strawberries in your fridge, the box on your porch, the medicine at your pharmacy. Every one of them crossed the country inside an engine held, gear by gear, inside a band a few hundred revolutions per minute wide. So here's where you actually land. You pulled up next to that truck and heard it climb through gear after gear, and it sounded like a machine doing something needlessly complicated. A relic. 18 gears when 6 would seem plenty, but what you were hearing was an 80-year argument with physics. A diesel engine that only makes power inside a window a few hundred revolutions per minute wide. 40 tons that has to be coaxed into motion and leaned on, hard, down every grade. A 1963 breakthrough that made stacking gears survivable. A 60-year climb to 18 of them, all to keep one stubborn engine singing in tune. And then a computer that learned to do it with 12. Trucks never added gears for the sake of gears. Every one was a tool to trap an engine inside the only place it works. The number climbed because the window stayed narrow. It's shrinking now because software finally aims better than we do. That sound you took for complication is the sound of your entire life being delivered, one perfectly chosen gear at a time. And if you think the transmission is the clever part, wait until you find out how the engine behind it lights its fuel with no spark plug at all, using nothing but air squeezed hot enough to start a fire.